Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 10 of English 120. This week, you're going to begin by watching this lecture. Now, just to give you a warning, this week's lecture is a bit longer, but the material I'm talking about is very important for you to complete, to learn, so you can write a very good research paper. So make sure you give yourself extra time today for this whole lecture. You also are going to be carefully reading chapter 14 in the Bedford Researcher. This is the chapter that talks about actually drafting your paper. So it's very important that you go through this chapter carefully. The main thing we're going to be working on is developing paragraphs where we use research to support what we're saying. So please definitely read this chapter. Your research module is going to build on what I talk about in this lecture, and it's called Proficiency with Sources. You're gonna need to take the quiz by next Thursday at 11:59 p.m. And then you'll also be doing a research journal where you're going to practice incorporating your sources into your research writing by building your first body paragraph. The body paragraphs assignment, which is all of your body paragraphs, is not due until next Thursday on 10/29. So you do have some time to develop that, but I want you to start working on that, okay? And don't forget, on Monday night at 6 p.m., we will have our live class, and we'll be talking about chapters 16 through 20 in Whose Names Are Unknown. Please make sure you've read those chapters before you attend, and please try to attend. I will also be answering questions that you might have about your research project during that time. All right, speaking of the research project, we are in week 10. Between this week and next week, you will be developing your body paragraphs, so the meat of your paper. This is the most important part of your paper, so please give yourself time to work on it. Then in week 12, we're going to talk about developing excellent introductions. You'll notice that we're not starting writing our paper by writing an introduction. That is not how you do it. The introduction and the conclusion are something you add on at the end of a paper. And we'll talk about that more when we get to week 12 and 13. We will be having conferences during week 14, and I will send out signups in the next week or so that you can plan for that. And it'll be actually between weeks 13 and 14, so I can get everybody in. You'll be doing a self-review, a peer review, and a final draft. So let's start by talking about the research module this week. So Proficiency with Sources is the online unit. And you're gonna, sorry, the description's wrong. There's always some error, right? You're going to learn how to use sources and integrate them into your writing as a way to build authority, as a way to really solidify your argument. So you're going to begin by reading the Bedford Researcher, chapter 15, which is part of your assignments anyways. You're also going to watch the video, it's short, called Research Writing Integrating Sources, kind of it's the information behind why we actually integrate sources. You can look at the website, Integrating Sources from Harvard University, Harvard College writing program, and then you can take the quiz. There's also a set of slides that are listed that I'm going to be talking you through right now. So make sure that you've watched this lecture before you take the quiz. And the quiz is not due on Monday, April 20th. The quiz is due on Thursday, next Thursday at 11:59 p.m. Apologize for the wrong date. I'll put it correctly when I put it live. So this is a lecture that was built by my colleague, Professor Yanover. And it's everything you need to know, or almost, about integrating quotations effectively. So the main thing to keep in mind when you're integrating quotations is that it takes considerable thought and thoughtfulness or critical thinking. Ineffective integration of quotations is typically the result of thoughtlessness, and it often involves just dropping in quotations. These are called floating quotations. And when you just kind of drop a quotation in without really integrating into the text, you don't do anything to put your argument forward. if there's nothing leading into the quotation or introducing it. And the most obvious sign of a dropped-in quotation is its appearance right after a sentence ending in a period or at the end of a complete clause ending in a semicolon. So if you're going to put a quotation in your writing, which you do have to do, you have to do many things to integrate it into your text. Dropped-in quotations have the potential to become even more serious when the sources they come from are not correctly identified. This is plagiarism. If you just stick in a quote and you don't tell us where it's from, that's plagiarism, as we talked about last week. The thoughtlessness that results in dropped-in quotations can come from ineffective selection of quotations, and quotations that merely restate the point may lead the writer to believe introducing it isn't necessary as the connection is obvious. Thus, the writer needs to put thought into the selection of quotations, okay? Intentionally choosing ones that leave room for and even necessitate the writer's interpretation and explanation of them. So, effective placement of quotations is also important. So, where you put them is also important, because the purpose of a quotation is to support an idea or point of your own. Quotations are most effective in research essays when placed in body paragraphs, which do the work of supporting the thesis. That's what we're going to be writing this week. Also, keeping in mind the 3 steps of a body paragraph. So, the point or main idea of the paragraph, the support to prove that point, and the explanation of the significance of the point in relation to the overall argument or thesis of your paper, how it proves and develops that argument. We can see that quotations clearly belong in step 2 as part of the support. So support to prove the point is where you put in your quotations, in the middle of the paragraphs. The next step is to weave the quotation into your paragraph and into your argument. As with paragraphs, there are steps to follow when working with quotations. They are signal phrase with correct punctuation, a colon or a comma or nothing depending on what is correct grammatically, the quotation, an in-text citation, and then an explanation of what the quotation means in regards to the point you're making. So just to give you some definitions, a signal phrase is a phrase that leads up to and prepares for the quotation. Some signal phrases identify the source, its author, title, context, or background. They establish the authority of the source. This type of signal phrase is generally called an attributive tag or attribution. Okay. There are a number of reasons why one might want to use an attributive tag. So, for example, if an author you're quoting is well known as an expert in his or her field, name dropping of this kind can add to your credibility, that you knew of this expert and that you knew enough to draw upon his or her expert knowledge. Or if the publication carries some prestige in the field, referring to it can likewise gain your credibility. Or if the author's ideas are controversial and clearly distinct from your own, you may name him or her in order to distinguish your own ideas and perspective from his or hers. So this might be valuable when you're writing your counter arguments. Or if the context, when, where it was published, who wrote it, etc., adds to our understanding of the ideas that you're quoting from the source. Okay, these are some main reasons why you might want to use an attributive tag. But truly integrating quotations goes beyond merely identifying the author or source. It involves thinking critically about the connection between the quotation and your main idea. That is what a signal phrase does. It creates a bridge between the different parts of the paragraph and even between the different parts of the support. For example, if the quotation only suggests a connection to your point, a signal phrase before the quotation can prompt your reader to notice what you want him or her to in about the quotation, and can also help focus your interpretation and explanation of the quotation afterwards, thus prompting you to prove your point. Often signal phrases and attributive tags are used in conjunction with each other. So keep in mind, there are 4 types of quotations. There's a short quotation. That's just, it's up to 4 lines once it's typed into your essay, and it's marked with quotation marks at the beginning and the end. Parenthetical in-text citations, right, are placed after the end quotation mark and before the end punctuation of your sentence. So before you put the period or whatever the punctuation is. And your citation is always last name or the first thing in your citation in your works cited page and the page number, okay? A long quotation in prose is 5 lines or more. Again, once typed into your essay. The left side is blocked or indented 1 inch, 1 step further than a paragraph indent, so twice as much. Quotation marks are not used. Blocked quotations are double spaced, but no extra spaces are placed above or below it. And they also have a citation with a last name, page number in parentheticals. A partial quotation is a type of short quotation, and it's a phrase or clause excerpted from the source that can be incorporated into your own sentence and syntax. Only short quotations can be partial, but they also need to be cited. So you always need to use last name, page number in parentheticals. A complete quotation is a complete sentence that can be introduced by your own sentence, set off by a colon. Some short quotations are complete and all long quotations are complete. And then if you want to make changes to quotations, ellipses are 3 spaced periods indicating material has been removed from inside a quotation. 3 spaced periods are used in the middle of a single sentence. A 4th period is needed if removing material between 2 complete sentences so as not to create a run-on. The 4th period is placed right next to the word at the end of the sentence before the material that has been removed. Ellipses are only needed at the end of a quotation if the end of the sentence from the original has been omitted. Ellipses are only needed at the beginning of a quotation if the beginning of the sentence has been omitted and the first word is capitalized, as in the case the reader may not be able to tell that that part of the sentence has been removed. So really rarely do you use ellipses at the beginning of a quotation. Note, only information that doesn't change the meaning of the original may be removed. Typically, what is removed is information that would be irrelevant or extraneous to the writer's essay, okay? Brackets are used to add clarifying information, such as a word or phrase, or to make changes to the quotation that don't change the meaning but enable it to fit into its new context. Most of these changes involve small grammatical changes to verb tense or pronouns. For example, the author of the original might use the first person I to refer to him or herself, but you would use the third person he or she to refer to him or her. Similarly, the author might use present tense verbs referring to events that for him or her were happening in the present, but because the event being described is one in your past, when you write about it, you use past tense verbs, so you may need to change the verb tense of the quotation to fit the syntax of your paragraph. So in this next section, you will see how one can build a body paragraph and effectively integrate different types of quotations using signal phrases and attributive tags. This is modeling what I want you to do for your research journal this week. And yes, it is very involved, and I want you to spend a lot of time on developing your first body paragraph so you can get it as good as you possibly can. All right, so here's the example. The topic of my essay is the sofa, and the article being used is Man at His Best Design by Tom Junod in Esquire on page 70 of the March 2002 issue that I found using the NBC library database. Here's my thesis. Too many working adults, sofas represent comfort. It's a very basic thesis, okay? The purpose of my essay is to prove this belief and to explain its importance. Why comfort is so important to working adults, but even possibly why believing that sofas represent comfort is so important. Each paragraph should add to the reader's and the writer's understanding of the thesis, building up to the conclusion where it will finally be fully developed. So first, I need to decide on a support point, a main idea for the paragraph, which relates to the thesis and will be used to support it. This sentence is sometimes called the topic sentence, okay? And that's what we're calling it. So this is the first thing you're going to be writing in your paragraph. For example, Sofas may have become ubiquitous, something we see in almost every abode, but it's clear they are nevertheless often associated with luxury. The point is that sofas are associated with luxury. And if I apply the 3 steps for a body paragraph to my topic, they are: point, sofas may have become ubiquitous, something we see in almost every abode, but it's clear they are nevertheless often associated with luxury. 2, support with evidence including the quotation. And 3, explanation of how and why the idea of sofas as luxury helps prove they represent comfort to working adults. Why is luxury associated with comfort? What is comfortable about luxury? What kind of comfort is suggested? What do this paragraph and point add to our understanding of the meaning and importance of comfort to working adults? Then I need to decide on a quotation I want to use. I like much of the essay. So this is, and just remember, we are only using one piece of evidence in this example. In your example, you're using 2. Okay, so you're going to be going through this twice. So I like most of this essay, but fair use and my own purpose require that I limit what I use to only what's relevant. So here's one section of the original essay that I like. The sectional isn't just a couch, it's a lifestyle, and so is tainted by all the prejudices that taint the word lifestyle itself. The sectional is the jacuzzi of couches. It is the California of couches, not only in terms of size and shape and population density, but also in its perhaps unfair association with recreational immorality. Though most sectionals do yeoman's duty in suburban living rooms, they still manage to be redolent of an orgy because of their Kama Sutra-esque flexibility and because they are far too often made of leather. Okay, even this entire section may not be necessary, though. So next I see what parts of the quotation I really need to use. I realize that the part about the word lifestyle isn't necessary either to understand the author's main point or to support mine, so I'll remove it. The rest of the quotation all seems to have potential, so I'll leave it in for now. And you can read below. Here's what it is now. The sectional isn't just a couch. The sectional is the jacuzzi of couches. And then I go on. It's the California of couches, not only in terms of size and shape and population density, but also in perhaps its unfair association with recreational immorality. Though most sectionals do yeoman's duty in suburban living rooms, they still manage to be redolent of an orgy because of their Kama Sutra-esque flexibility and because they are far too often made of leather. And then finally, I need to think critically about how this quotation will fit into the support for my point. Is it significant and substantial? Can I draw multiple conclusions from it or make multiple observations about it? Could it thus be my major example and the only one I really need? Or will I need more examples in addition to this one in order to prove the point completely and convincingly? Now I'm ready to start building the paragraph. First, I'll re-examine the point, the highlighted first sentence in the paragraph below. Is it clear on its own or do I need to explain it? Rereading it, I realize I might need to explain the concept of luxury and establish the premise of the sofa as a luxury. You'll see what I've added below. Sofas may have become ubiquitous, something we see in almost every abode, but it's clear they are nevertheless often associated with luxury. And then I added, as a luxury item, they often come with a high cost. Some sofas are easily over $1,000. The fact that this expense is unnecessary also categorizes it as luxury. One may need a place to sit, but one clearly doesn't need a $1,000 place to sit. There are also many sofas that are designed with luxury in mind, with frames of rare woods, cushions filled with down, and upholstery of luxurious fabrics such as velvet, silk, and leather. Even sofas constructed of less expensive materials increase in cost when increased in size. So now I'm ready to introduce and integrate the source and the quotation. While it's possible to write a simple attributive tag such as Tom Junod writes, I want to integrate this quotation into my support, which means keeping my main idea in the reader's mind. To do this, I need to do more than simply say who wrote it or where it was published. Indeed, the most important element of the signal phrase will be pointing out the emphasis in the passage itself that relates to my point. In addition, however, I have an opportunity to gain some credibility with my name dropping by pointing out that the author is a known and respected journalist. Here's what I came up with. In an article in Esquire, award-winning journalist Tom Junot describes the trend of the sectional sofa, emphasizing its decadence. Note, the facts that Tom Junot is a journalist and has won awards are common knowledge. I found them easily on the internet, mentioned on multiple sites, so I don't need to cite them, but I have been careful to put them in my own words. Okay, now I'm ready to add the quotation. Here's the paragraph so far, along with the quotation. Sofas may have become ubiquitous, something we see in almost every abode, but it's clear they are nevertheless often associated with luxury. As a luxury item, they often come with a high cost. Some sofas are easily over $1,000. The fact that this expense is unnecessary also categorizes it as a luxury. One may need to a place to sit, but one clearly doesn't need a $1,000 place to sit. There are also many sofas that are designed with luxury in mind, with frames of rare woods, cushions filled with down, and upholstery of luxurious fabrics such as velvet, silk, and leather. Even sofas constructed of less expensive materials increase in cost when increased in size. In an article in Esquire, award-winning journalist Tom Junot describes the trend of the sectional sofa, emphasizing its decadence. The sectional isn't just a couch. The sectional is a jacuzzi of couches. It is the California of couches, not only in terms of size and shape and population density, but also its perhaps unfair association with recreational immorality. Though most sectionals do yeoman's duty in suburban living rooms, they still manage to be redolent of an orgy because of their Kama Sutra-esque flexibility and because they are far too often made of leather. Now I need to interpret the quotation, pointing out the decadence and explaining how it proves a point. The luxury of sofas. When interpreting and explaining a passage, I am not just paraphrasing or repeating what the quotation says. That's very important, you guys. If you've been zoning out, do not just paraphrase or repeat what the quotation said. I need to think about not only what the quotation means, but how it means it and why. To prepare, let me analyze the quotation, breaking it down into parts and thinking about the meaning and relevance of each part. So the quotation, the sectional isn't just a couch. Interpretation, the word just is the one emphasized here, insisting that the sectional is important, more important even than the couch, but also suggesting couches, at least ones that are sectionals, are important. It's not just an object, it's more important than that. It's important. The sectional is a jacuzzi of couches. Even if someone wants to argue that sofas are a necessity, clearly the line is drawn at sectionals with this analogy that compares sectionals to jacuzzis and by extension couches to pools. While pools might be used for swimming or exercise and ultimately health, and so might be considered legitimate and necessary, though arguably owning a pool is not necessary, jacuzzis are used to lounge and relax, and thus selected by Junot because they are most certainly luxury items and symbols of unmistakable decadence. Okay, the quotation is, it is the California of couches, not only in terms of size and shape and population density, but also in its perhaps unfair association with recreational immortality. So interpretation, too much of the rest of the country, and Junot is from New York, which is important to note, California is a symbol of extravagance and decadence. Junot extends the analogy between sectionals and the state, pointing out that they're similar L-curved shapes, they're similar large sizes, and they're similar population density, a cute reference to how many people fit on a sectional in contrast to a regular sofa, or other states, also implicitly hinting at their common desirability and popularity. The second half of the sentence, after the but, is what connects most clearly to the decadence, both by mentioning the sectionals and the state's recreational purpose, and of course their perceived immorality. While not all recreational activities are immoral, it is recreational activities that are often deemed immoral, not typically work-related ones. We also often refer euphemistically to doing drugs or having sex as recreational activities, and that association is evoked here. Also, decadence by its nature is considered by Americans to be somewhat immoral. This is a perspective tied to our Puritan origins, also mentioned by Junot in the concluding paragraph of his essay. His judgment of this association as unfair is tongue-in-cheek, but so is the association of overall analogy itself. But the judgment, nevertheless, is serious in pointing out American attitudes towards these towards these subjects. Overall, the essay blends humor and criticism, resulting in satire. And then we get to the end of it. Though most sectionals do yeoman's duty in suburban living rooms, they still manage to be redolent of an orgy because of their Kama Sutra-esque flexibility and because they are far too often made of leather. So the interpretation is, interestingly, each of the last sentences in this quoted passage is longer than the previous one, which suggests that the decadence is taking over. The writing, in this case, the same way that the sectional and its decadence take over the sectional owners' lives and living rooms. So the first part of the sentence about the actual work functionality of sofas, even sectionals, is irrelevant, though it adds seriousness and credibility to Junot's argument. Without it, the reader, especially one who wants to shout, "It's just a sofa," would see the humor, but not the seriousness, and tend to reject any social criticism and awareness the essay might have to offer. The next clause returns to the examination of sectionals as decadent, calling them redolent. This is suggested or reminiscent of an orgy. While redolent has neutral connotations, it is a heavier word than other synonyms, like those listed above in brackets, especially its resonant sound and lesser familiarity. It is an extravagant word, what my 8th grade English teacher would have called a $10 word rather than a $1 word, the simpler and more familiar kind. Of course, far more decadent is the orgy a sectional is supposedly redolent of. Sex in itself is suggestive of decadence and the immorality mentioned in the previous sentence. Sex on a sofa, which is hardly necessary, even more so, and this is an orgy, sex in the extreme, sex out of bounds and out of control. And even this idea, Junot extends to the extreme, to the exotic Kama Sutra, and adding flexibility, so that he's clearly talking about, and we're picturing, exciting sex. And then he adds leather, which when referring to a sofa is fairly ordinary, but not when sex is already in the picture. So now he would have us picture skin on skin. But really, he's using this analogy not just for the sex appeal or titillation, but because he wants us to recognize the appeal of leather in a sofa, the extravagance and decadence it connotes, whether or not sex is literally in the picture. Okay, so you can see when you choose the right quotation, the thinking, interpretation, and explanation can expand and expand and expand. Okay, so that was a lot of writing to do off of just one quotation. For 4 quoted sentences, I have paragraphs of material, which I will now need to cut down to size using only what is most relevant. All of this work that I'm doing right now, I want you to do with your quotations for this week's research journal, okay? So here's a paragraph with the interpretation added. Sofas may have become ubiquitous, something we see in almost every abode, but it's clear they are nevertheless often associated with luxury. As a luxury item, they often come with a high cost. Some sofas are easily over $1,000. The fact that this expense is unnecessary also categorizes it as a luxury. One may need a place to sit, but one clearly doesn't need a $1,000 place to sit. There are also many sofas that are designed with luxury in mind, with frames of rare woods, cushions filled with down, and upholsteries of luxurious fabrics such as velvet, silk, and leather. Even sofas constructed of less expensive materials increase in cost when increased in size. So that was all the introduction of the topic, right? The topic sentence and then some explanation. Those are the first few sentences. Then we get to the signal phrase, which is an expansion of an attribution. In an article in Esquire, award-winning journalist Tom Junot describes the trend of the sectional sofa emphasizing its decadence. Notice there's a colon to introduce where the quote is starting, and also that this is a block quote. That means it's indented 1 inch. The sectional isn't just a couch. Notice the ellipses. There's 4 because there's a period there. The sectional is the jacuzzi of couches. It is the California of couches, not only in terms of size and shape and population density, but also in its perhaps unfair association with recreational immorality. Though most sectionals do yeoman's duty in suburban living rooms, they still manage to be redolent of an orgy because of their Kama Sutra-esque flexibility and because they are far too often made of leather. So here comes the interpretation. Notice that we put the page number 70 in the parentheticals to indicate what page this was on. By claiming that sectionals are more than just couches and then comparing them to jacuzzis, California, and sex, Juneau points out their extravagance and ultimately their decadence. So that is an interpretation of what was in the quote. Sectionals are not just necessities. They are luxuries aimed at enjoyment, not survival. Juneau takes the extravagance a step further by evoking extremes of enjoyment, the hedonism associated with jacuzzis in California. Mentioning orgies, sex in the extreme, in the next sentence seems almost redundant. Juneau, a New Yorker, clearly knows that for many non-Californians, California itself conjures up the image of freewheeling singles or couples having sex indiscriminately in their jacuzzis, peacock feathers optional. Though he acknowledges the association with recreational immorality may be unfair, he doesn't contradict the image of sex and drugs in California overall as a den of iniquity. But of course, he is not really talking about California, but about sectionals and couches. And while it may be possible to have sex indiscriminately or drugs on one sectional, he is not describing literal activities, but making an analogy. Even the tongue-in-cheek nature of his satire, however, cannot dispel the serious social criticism it uncovers. While the sex, drugs, and jacuzzis may simply be stereotyping and hyperbole, Juneau is perceptive in pointing out the value we place on hedonism. So the last step of my paragraph is to connect the dots. So now I need to create a bridge from the interpretation that I just gave at the bottom of that paragraph back to my main point and finally back to the thesis. So my subtopic and the thesis. The transition from one step and the next may not be apparent, especially if they're done effectively. So this should flow seamlessly. But notice how toward the end I start opening my interpretation up from looking at particular passages and meanings to the overall purpose of the passage and author and relating it to my meaning. In this case, I'm picking up on and emphasizing the importance of hedonism. So read on for the rest of the paragraph. This is the end that I've added. Survival and mere necessities are no longer sufficient to make or keep us comfortable. We, quote, need luxury, pleasure in the extreme, pleasure for its own sake, and the sofa makes this luxury or comfort tangible. But we might also understand the word luxury to mean something that is rare and hard to come by, and comfort is often such a luxury for working adults, who outside their homes subject themselves and sacrifice their own comfort to others' wills. So we need access to comfort and feel we deserve it all the more in our own homes. Okay, so this is this plus this is the full paragraph, okay? It's a very long paragraph. It's more than 12 sentences long, but this is a beautifully written paragraph, okay, that really seamlessly takes a quotation and merges it into the argument that the speaker is writing, okay? That's what I want you to work on for this week's research journal. So I'm going to go to the research journal next. So you're going to practice writing your first body paragraph using quotations to support the points that you're arguing, just like I went over in this very long lecture, okay? You're going to start with one of the subtopics you've listed in your outline. You're going to look through the sources that you've listed underneath that topic to find 2 or 3 good quotations or points you might want to paraphrase in your writing, okay? Make sure you spend time with these quotations. All that writing that was done that I just went over in regards to the quotation that Professor Yanover chose, right? That's what I want you to do. I want you to analyze your quotation, okay? And then I want you to start drafting your body paragraph. Use the structure listed here to weave your evidence into your writing. And remember, you need to begin your quotation with an attribution or signal phrase, and you need to interpret any quotation that you include, okay? So you're going to begin with your topic sentences. So you're going to introduce a topic and contextualize it. So remember, that was several sentences in the sample paragraph. And you'll introduce a claim. You'll use evidence to support that claim. And you'll introduce that evidence using a signal phrase. And then you will interpret the evidence, relating it back to your argument. Then you'll introduce a second claim within your paragraph. You'll use evidence to support that claim, and you'll use the signal phrase to introduce that evidence. And then you'll interpret the evidence, relating it back to your argument. And then you'll write a concluding sentence that clarifies how these two claims help you prove your topic, your subtopic, and also your thesis. Okay? We're also this week going to be continuing to read Whose Names Are Unknown. We will be reading, oh my gosh, not 20 through 24. Wow. Okay. Disregard this slide completely. I'll go here. Sorry. So this week we will be meeting on Monday at 6 p.m. and we'll be going over chapters 16 through 20. Please make sure that you read these chapters actively before you come to the discussion. We will be doing writing on, especially I want you to especially pay attention to chapter 17, which is really, really an interesting chapter. Okay? That's it for this week, you guys. Thank you for bearing with me on a very long lecture. If you have questions after watching this, this lecture, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and ask me questions. All right? Hope you have a great weekend.